Dubai is perhaps the greatest monument ever built to a single, seductive idea that with enough money, human beings can conquer anything, even nature itself. Out of the barren, blistering sand of the Arabian desert, one of the most inhospitable environments on the planet, Dubai has raised a glittering city of soaring skyscrapers, artificial islands shaped like palm trees, and shopping malls so vast they contain indoor ski slopes with real snow. In a place where summers are among the harshest on Earth, Dubai has engineered a life of air-conditioned luxury, a cool and comfortable bubble maintained against the furnace outside. For decades, it has seemed to prove that wealth really can buy an escape from even the most brutal environment. But this summer, and increasingly every summer, Dubai is running headlong into something that all of its staggering wealth cannot simply purchase its way out of. As the temperature that the human body actually feels climbs toward and beyond 60 degrees Celsius, the city built on the promise that money can solve any problem is discovering the hard physical limits of what wealth and engineering can actually achieve against the raw power of heat and humidity. This is the story of the richest experiment ever conducted in conquering the desert, and the point at which even limitless money slams into a wall. Before we go further, honesty requires an important clarification about that 60-degree figure, because it is often misunderstood and sometimes deliberately sensationalized. Dubai's actual air temperature does not reach 60 degrees Celsius. The genuine air temperature in a Dubai summer typically peaks somewhere in the mid-40s, often around 43 to 45 degrees Celsius, which is already ferociously, dangerously hot, but it is not 60. So where does the 60-degree number come from? It comes from what meteorologists call the heat index, or the feels-like temperature. Dubai sits directly on the warm waters of the Persian Gulf, and that proximity loads the air with tremendous humidity, which along the coast can climb to 90% or higher. When you combine air temperatures in the mid-40s with that suffocating level of moisture, the resulting heat index, the temperature that the human body actually experiences, soars to around 60 to 62 degrees Celsius and has occasionally been reported even higher. This is not a trick or an exaggeration. The heat index is in fact the far more meaningful measurement, because it captures what the heat actually does to a living human body, which is the only number that truly matters when we are talking about survival. It is worth dwelling on this distinction, because it is routinely abused, and getting it right actually makes the situation more alarming rather than less. Plenty of sensational coverage screams that Dubai has hit 60 degrees, implying an air temperature that would rank among the hottest ever reliably recorded anywhere on the planet, which is simply false and easy to debunk. The honest picture is more nuanced, but ultimately more frightening. An air temperature of 45 degrees in bone-dry conditions and an air temperature of 45 degrees in 90% humidity are, from the perspective of the human body, two completely different worlds. The first is dangerous. The second can be deadly. By reporting only the raw air temperature, we would actually understate the threat, because we would miss the crucial role of the humidity that turns a merely severe heat into a potentially lethal one. So when this account speaks of a 60-degree summer, it is speaking of the feels-like temperature, the heat index, and doing so deliberately, because that is the honest measure of the danger. The air does not read 60 on a thermometer, but the human body, struggling and failing to cool itself in the soupy Gulf air, experiences something very close to it. That is the reality that matters, and it is the reality that Dubai's residents and workers must actually live within. To understand why the feels-like temperature matters so much more than the raw air temperature, you have to understand how the human body copes with heat, and why humidity is the silent killer in this equation. Your body maintains a stable internal temperature, primarily by sweating. When sweat evaporates from your skin, it carries heat away with it, cooling you down. This system works beautifully in dry heat. This is why a dry desert at 45 degrees, while dangerous, is survivable, because your sweat can evaporate efficiently and cool you. But when the air is already saturated with moisture, as it is along the humid Gulf Coast, your sweat cannot evaporate. It simply sits on your skin, useless, and your body's one great cooling mechanism fails. This is what makes humid heat so uniquely lethal compared to dry heat at the very same temperature. And there is a hard physical ceiling to this, a threshold scientists call the wet bulb temperature. When the wet bulb temperature exceeds about 35 degrees Celsius, a healthy human being, even resting in the shade with unlimited water, will die within a matter of hours, because the body physically cannot shed its own heat. The Persian Gulf region, where Dubai sits, is one of the very few places on the entire planet that is beginning to approach this ultimate limit of human survivability. Dubai, in other words, is flirting with the outer edge of what the human body can physically endure. It is worth pausing to let the strangeness of that wet bulb threshold sink in, because it defies our normal intuitions about heat. We tend to assume that as long as we have shade, water, and rest, we can wait out almost any hot day. For most of human history, and in most places, that assumption has held true, but the wet bulb limit breaks it entirely. At a sufficiently high combination of heat and humidity, none of those things save you. Shade does not help, because the air itself is too hot and too wet. Water does not help, because drinking it cannot cool a body that has lost its ability to sweat effectively. Rest does not help, because even at complete rest, a human body continuously generates its own metabolic heat. And if it cannot shed that heat, its core temperature climbs inexorably toward the point of organ failure. This is a genuinely new kind of danger for large populations, a form of heat against which the traditional human strategies simply do not work. And while such conditions remain, for now, relatively brief and rare even in the Gulf, they are becoming less rare with each passing decade. And the mere fact that they now occur at all in an inhabited region is a warning of the most serious kind. Dubai is not merely hot, it is edging toward a category of heat that the human species has almost never had to survive. Faced with this brutal reality, Dubai's answer has been to do what Dubai does best, to spend its way to a solution, to engineer around the heat with sheer money and ambition. And the centerpiece of that strategy is air conditioning, deployed not as an occasional luxury, but as the fundamental life support system of the entire city. Dubai is in essence an air-conditioned civilization. Its shopping malls are the size of small towns, kept perpetually cool. It has indoor ski slopes where visitors snowboard on real snow, while the desert bakes at 45 degrees just beyond the glass. Its offices, homes, cars, hotels, and even some of its bus stops and outdoor walkways are climate controlled. Enormous district cooling systems pump chilled water throughout entire neighborhoods. The city has, quite remarkably, constructed a vast and continuous bubble of cool, comfortable air held in defiance of the murderous heat outside. And for those able to remain within that bubble, it works astonishingly well. Dubai has genuinely managed to transform one of the most hostile environments on Earth into a place of comfort, even of luxury. It is, by any measure, an extraordinary engineering achievement, a triumph of money and ingenuity over a merciless climate. It is worth appreciating just how total this transformation has been, because it goes far beyond mere comfort. Air conditioning did not simply make Dubai more pleasant, it made the modern city possible at all. Without it, the towers could not be occupied, the offices could not function, the population could not live there in anything like its current numbers. The entire economy, the finance, the tourism, the trade, all of it depends on the ability to maintain habitable indoor conditions year-round in a place that would otherwise be unbearable for months at a time. In this sense, cooling is not an amenity layered on top of the city. It is the very foundation on which the city stands, as essential as its roads or its ports. This is what makes the dependency so complete and so consequential. A city in a temperate climate can suffer an air conditioning failure and simply be uncomfortable for a while. Dubai cannot. For Dubai, cooling is existential, woven into the basic possibility of the place existing as it does, and a civilization that has made cooling existential has, by that very fact, bound its entire fate to the systems, the energy, and the money required to sustain that cooling without interruption, forever. The achievement is real and dazzling, but it comes with a dependency unlike almost anything else in the modern world. But this is precisely where the limits begin to reveal themselves, one after another. And the first and most obvious is this: you cannot air condition the outdoors. All of that magnificent cooling only functions inside enclosed spaces. The moment a person steps out of the mall, out of the car, out of the cooled lobby, the bubble bursts and the full, staggering weight of the heat descends instantly. Money can chill a building, but it cannot chill the open air, the streets, the sky, the city as a whole. And so life in Dubai during the peak of summer becomes a strange, constrained existence, a series of quick, anxious dashes between one air-conditioned box and the next, with the outdoors reduced to a hostile, no-man's land to be crossed as rapidly as possible. The wealth that buys such total comfort indoors buys almost nothing the instant one steps outside. And crucially, not everyone in Dubai has the option of staying inside the bubble. This brings us to the second and most morally significant limit, one that cuts to the very heart of the matter. Dubai was not built by the wealthy who enjoy its cooled towers, and it is not maintained by them either. The city was constructed and is kept running by an enormous workforce of migrant laborers, who make up the great majority of the population, workers who came from across South Asia and elsewhere in search of opportunity, and a vast number of them work outdoors. The construction workers raising the next skyscraper, the delivery riders crossing the city, the gardeners, the cleaners, the laborers who do the physical work that the gleaming city depends upon. For these people, there is no air-conditioned refuge during the working day. They labor directly in the heat that the wealthy are so careful to escape. To its credit, the government has implemented real protective measures, most notably a mandatory midday break rule that prohibits outdoor work during the hottest hours of the afternoon throughout the peak summer months. This is a genuine and meaningful protection. But even with such measures, prolonged exposure to this extreme heat remains a serious and well-documented danger to workers' health, and it is here that the central irony of the entire city becomes impossible to ignore. The comfort of those inside the cool bubble rests directly upon the labor of those who cannot enter it. Money buys the fortunate an escape from the heat, but the very people who build that escape are the ones left most exposed to it. It is a division as old as cities themselves, but the rising heat sharpens it to a fine and dangerous point, turning what was once merely hard, uncomfortable labor into work that carries a real and growing risk to life. The third limit is subtler, but in the long run perhaps the most damning of all, because it reveals that Dubai's solution is quietly feeding the very problem it is trying to solve. All of that air conditioning, all of that relentless cooling requires a colossal and ever-growing amount of energy, and the demand only rises as the city grows hotter and larger, creating an insatiable appetite for power. The overwhelming majority of that energy has historically come from burning fossil fuels, the very activity that is driving the global warming that is making the heat worse in the first place. So the city cools itself by means that heat the planet. But the trap runs even deeper than that, in a way that is almost poetic in its cruelty. Every single air conditioner, by its basic physical nature, does not eliminate heat, it merely moves it. It takes the heat from inside a building and pumps it out into the surrounding air. So a city carpeted in air conditioners is a city constantly dumping enormous quantities of waste heat into its own streets, intensifying what is known as the urban heat island effect and making the outdoor environment even hotter than it would otherwise be. Dubai, in cooling its interiors, is actively heating its exteriors. The solution, quite literally, worsens the problem it was built to solve. The fourth limit reveals just how deep this dependency on energy truly runs, and it concerns something even more fundamental than cooling: water itself. Dubai sits in a desert with almost no natural fresh water. So where does the water come from? The water that fills its swimming pools, irrigates its improbable golf courses, and flows from the taps of millions of people. Overwhelmingly, it comes from desalination, the process of removing salt from seawater drawn out of the Persian Gulf. And desalination is one of the most energy-intensive industrial processes there is, demanding vast amounts of power to force seawater through the systems that render it drinkable. This means that Dubai's two most essential lifelines, its cooling and its water, both rest entirely upon an enormous and continuous supply of energy. The hotter it gets, the more energy the city needs for both, which means more fuel burned, which means more emissions, which means more warming, which means more heat. The entire glittering edifice runs upon a steadily rising tide of energy consumption, and the hotter the world becomes, the more voraciously it must consume, in a spiral that has no natural end. The fifth limit is the fragility hidden within all of this, the vulnerability that the comfort so effectively disguises. This entire magnificent life support system, the cooling and the water alike, depends absolutely upon one thing: the uninterrupted flow of electrical power. The air-conditioned paradise is, at every moment, only a sustained blackout away from catastrophe. Consider what would happen during a prolonged power failure in the depth of a Dubai summer. The cooled bubbles, the malls and towers and homes would begin to heat up within hours, their interior temperatures climbing rapidly toward the lethal conditions outside. A city of profound comfort could transform into a genuinely dangerous place with frightening speed. This is the paradox at the core of Dubai's achievement. The wealth and engineering have produced a system of extraordinary comfort that is also, in a fundamental sense, extraordinarily brittle, utterly dependent on the ceaseless flow of energy that keeps the cold air circulating. Remove that flow for long enough, and the entire miracle unravels. A civilization that has engineered away the heat has, in the process, made itself utterly dependent on never ever losing power. It is a bargain that works flawlessly right up until the moment it does not, and the stakes of that moment climb higher with every degree the world warms. And this leads us to the deepest and most unyielding limit of all, the one against which even infinite money is finally powerless: the raw physics of the natural world. Wealth, for all its capacity to rearrange and to build, cannot alter the fundamental laws that govern heat and the human body. It cannot repeal the wet bulb threshold beyond which human life becomes impossible. It cannot lower the temperature of the outdoor air across an entire region. It cannot halt the global warming that is steadily pushing the Persian Gulf closer and closer to the edge of survivability. You can construct the most lavish, most sophisticated bubble of cool air in the history of the world, but you cannot construct a bubble large enough to enclose the atmosphere itself. As the climate continues to warm and the region drifts toward the hard physical ceiling of human heat tolerance, no quantity of money changes what a thermometer reads outdoors, and no quantity of money changes what a human body can actually withstand. The physics simply does not accept bribes. Now, in fairness, none of this is to mock Dubai or to diminish what it has accomplished, because its achievement is, in truth, genuinely remarkable. It has built a thriving, modern, prosperous metropolis of millions of people in one of the most punishing environments anywhere on the planet, a feat that would have seemed impossible not long ago. Its adaptations, from its cooling infrastructure to its protective labor regulations to its careful urban planning, are real and in many ways impressive, and other hot climate cities may well learn from them. Nor is Dubai remotely alone in facing this challenge. Cities across the hot regions of the world, from the Middle East to South Asia to the American Southwest, are all grappling with their own versions of intensifying, increasingly dangerous heat. The point of examining Dubai is not to single it out for failure. It is that Dubai represents the most extreme, best-funded, most ambitious attempt humanity has yet made to simply buy and engineer its way out of a lethal climate, and even that supreme effort is now colliding with limits that money alone cannot overcome. If the wealthiest experiment cannot fully succeed, that tells us something profound about the challenge facing everyone else. For this is really why Dubai matters so much as a case study, why its struggle is worth our close attention. Dubai is the crucible, the place where the belief that wealth and technology can conquer any environment is being tested to its absolute breaking point. Everything unfolding there, the comfort and the limits, the ingenious solutions and the vicious spirals, the luxury of the few and the exposure of the many, the fragility hidden beneath the spectacle, is a preview, an early and vivid glimpse of what more and more of the world will be forced to confront as global temperatures climb. If the richest city on Earth, throwing essentially unlimited resources at the problem, cannot simply buy its way to a comfortable and secure future in the face of extreme heat, then that raises deeply uncomfortable questions for the countless places that face the same rising temperatures with a tiny fraction of the money. Dubai is at once the canary in the coal mine and the grandest laboratory, showing us both how far human wealth and ingenuity can go, and precisely where they finally run out. So Dubai is discovering something that its wealth was never supposed to have to confront, something that runs against the very founding faith of the city itself, that there exists, after all, a limit to what money can buy. Money can buy cool air and gleaming towers. It can buy an artificial winter in the middle of the desert and a life of shaded, chilled comfort for those fortunate enough to remain indoors. It can buy spectacle, luxury, and the intoxicating illusion of complete and total mastery over nature. But it cannot buy a cooler sky. It cannot buy safe streets in the middle of July, or a workday in the open air that will not endanger the person laboring through it. It cannot buy an exemption from the basic physics of a human body that past a certain point can no longer shed its own heat. As the temperature the body actually feels pushes toward and beyond 60 degrees, the city built entirely on the promise that enough money can solve anything is meeting, at last, the one problem it cannot simply purchase its way out of. The desert has always been indifferent to human wealth, and the warming atmosphere above it more indifferent still. No fortune, however vast, and no engineering, however brilliant, can negotiate with the raw temperature of the open desert air. And in the end, that indifference may prove to be the one thing in all the world that Dubai, for all its billions, simply cannot buy.